Well, happy time of day, good time of day to everyone out there. Morning if you're further west from the mountains, and good afternoon if you're in central or eastern or further that direction. I'm so excited to get a chance to speak with you today about psychology, the merging of psychology and choir. I've heard there's been some great discussion already in the chat. I spent many years of my life in a school teaching part-time choir and also part-time psychology, AP psychology and intro to psych. And so these two things have always been near and dear to my heart. And I'm happy to talk about a little bit. There's far too much to speak to overall in the both of these worlds, but at least to talk a bit about the merging, the intersections of these two disciplines. Um, is we go through basically when I put this presentation together for the first time, I spent a good did some literature review. Now I'm sure I've looked at over 60 studies trying to find in various journals connections between choir or music education generally and different types of psychological topics out there. And for a session like this, I have four basic goals. I think we're all at some level armchair psychologists or experimenters in education in our classroom laboratories. And so we might confirm some anecdotal observations or see how our observations line up or don't line up with the theory. It's amazing how sometimes the theories that we come up with in experiments don't seem to be reproducible in real world situations. But we'll also work on refreshing our knowledge of previously learned material. There's a lot that I learned, at least in my educational psych class when I was in, pre-service teacher training, and then plenty that I forgot about. And it's always nice to hear some of those words again. It's good as a goal for me to think about connecting ideas from different subtypes and disciplines within psychology and connecting it to music education. And then also with each topic we discuss, you'll have maybe a thought to be able to reflect on your teaching practice and maybe invite some adjustments to take place. So when you start anything with choir, a great starting place is always Andrea Ramsey. And she, in 2016, published an article in the Choral Journal that detailed a process, like a qualitative bit of research she had conducted, where she addressed this question, left an open-ended prompt for choir members from 7th through 12th grade in a variety of school choir situations. However, every chorister was from a program that she regarded as having a certain tradition of excellence. So she felt like the students would have had at least positive engagement with choir. And she just asked them to fill in the blank, choir is. And after engaging in some analysis, she sorted out 8 themes for the responses that she got. And I think this is a great place to begin, is to ask the students their feelings, their perceptions about choir. And this gets us to the heart of their psychological experience. And so the first theme was expression and awareness, where choir helped some students feel like they could express their emotions or become more aware of their emotional experience. Some students felt like choir was more about just the stress relief, relaxation, just enjoying being together. Some students found that maybe things went a step further than just relaxation, but they saw choir more as something that helped them feel a sense of community, family, team, but a place where people could unify together to work together for a common purpose. Some students found choir that boosting their emotional and intellectual experience and making it perhaps inspiring them just a little bit, seeing that the impact the choir could have on their personality, on who they are as a person, and transforming them through time. Some saw the bonds, sort of the encompassing unifying, but instead of feeling like a team of people working together as one, it was more about time to spend with friends, getting to do something enjoyable together. And it was that social value that they found important for choir. Certainly, some students recognized the intellectual gains, learning new things, deepening their understanding of music and getting to work on those things. And some students even enjoyed the hard work that came from, spending time refining the details, and then the reward when that concert or that performance goes well. And finally, there were some students who found that they gave choir, the top place in their lives. It was something that was a part of their personality or their identity, and they were choir kids. And we know, I bet you could think of in your ensembles that you direct that there are kids who check off one or more of these themes that Ramsey described, and not every student is going to be the same. Thank goodness. We need a range of purposes and students and motivations for people to be taking choir. But I think it's interesting to see these themes, and then we can compare that to the main psychological approach that I'll be comparing this to today is self-determination theory, which comes somewhat in the field of maybe we can link it to motivation psychology. And the reason I find this theory to be particularly useful to discuss is that it is a general theory that really integrates six separate pathways of research that looked at intrinsic motivation, looked at extrinsic motivation, research that was looking at how people think about the causes of behavior and the different ways people work with their environments, looking at our basic psychological needs, and then looking at our goals and relationships. And so in self-determination theory, they really linked together several smaller theories to try to look at what we need as people, what we need as human beings, the basic psychological needs that support our healthy psychological growth and our wellness. And these tie in certainly to intellectual growth, and I'd say for students as well, their growth and development as children into teenagers into young adults, that kind of healthy personal growth as well. And the three basic needs that we'll be addressing in self-determination theory are on the next slide. There they are. We have first autonomy needs. Sometimes in the literature, these are called power needs. And I put an asterisk here just to remind myself to say, when we think of power, often we hear it in like terms of power struggles or power dynamics, and one person is here and one person is here. This is not what is meant by the term power here, but rather a feeling of being empowered to engage in activities. That's this autonomy motivation. We also have competence motivation, or sometimes you'll hear achievement motivation. I think it's interesting, just the slight difference in inference of meaning between those words, where if you think of somebody as being competent versus somebody achieving something, achieving might sound better, but competence is also the main term that gets used in self-determination theory. And then finally, we have relatedness needs, and we might call that affiliation needs at some level as well. So first, we'll address autonomy needs. Cool. When we get to autonomy in self-determination theory is describing our ability to act with a sense of agency, to feel like we are free to make choices and to engage in our own in what we'd like to do, engage in our own will. This is important, I think, to differentiate. Usually, when we hear about autonomy, you might think of that as a term to describe doing whatever you want. Like I can feel like I can just be free to do anything, but it's not necessarily freedom to act to do whatever you please, but it's perhaps the awareness that you do have freedom to act. And sometimes when we think of autonomy, it might be thought of as just independent work. The student is working autonomously, they're working on their own. But again, autonomy isn't necessarily about acting alone. It's about knowing your own individual power to be free to act, to make choices within a situation. And so we'll connect that to a couple of different psychological concepts that come from personality psychology and or the psychology of learning and behavior. The first is the locus of control, which when I first learned this concept, I always remember thinking of it as the locust of control. It took a while for my psych teacher, I think, to get that out of my head, but it did amuse me in certain respects. The locus of control describes an individual's perception of what is controlling their life, what is in charge of deciding things. And of course, essentially, this divides down into two categories along a continuum. People can feel a sense of an internal locus of control, and they might feel diminishing levels of internal locus all the way to an external locus of control. And it is worth noting this isn't one thing or the other, but there is a continuum when it comes to these, and that changes from situation to situation and dynamic to dynamic. An internal locus of control often relates to higher feelings of autonomy and personal choice. And when we provide autonomy supportive events or contexts, very jargon-rich bit of language there, but often this induces more, allows for more creativity as students or as individuals can choose the things they'd like to do. Certainly a more positive feeling about a situation. Students might be more persistent when they feel like they have an internal locus, like they are driving their own choices, and maybe even greater interest in a subject. If, however, people feel like external events control their life, that it's the outside that is telling them what to do and forcing them to do particular things, this is decreased autonomy. And whenever we have these autonomy controlling events, must do this, cannot do that, need to do these things, there's often that's associated with a negative emotional tone, a decrease of motivation, and may be associated with higher levels of learned helplessness. And learned helplessness comes from behavioral psychology. Um, the original study that it went into this with dogs and learned helplessness is one that will stick with you if you read that in this short webinar. I don't have time to talk about all of those details, but if you want to stick around after in the lobby, that'd be fine to talk about. But learned helplessness, I think we hear about more as educators now. This condition when an individual becomes either passive to the events around them or perhaps withdrawn, usually being seen as a result of either unyielding punishment or like unremitting failure, just a sense of failure after failure after failure. And we might see it in some of these ways that are on the screen now of students giving up easily, refusing to try things, refusing to complete and finish work, turning down help if it's offered, not even feeling like they should try to help in those ways. And then we might see a lack of motivation in school, sabotaging behaviors, and then, of course, lower grades that might go into that. And sometimes with learned helplessness, we might even see disruptive behaviors where a student might learn that it's easier to cause a disruption and get sent out of class than it is to stick around and continue to feel that sense of failure. Or they might be exerting their autonomy, their ability to choose and act with volition in ways to disrupt situations rather than for positive gain. And within certain frameworks, a few things, if you notice students becoming exhibiting some signs of learned helplessness, which have heard more and more. I see blog posts about this, but avoiding persistent, unavoidable punishments. I mean, we do have to have rules and structure in school, and it's not a free for all. But if the punishments are something that are just unavoidable for students, that can reduce that sense of autonomy. Of course, the emotional climate we set for the class, the support structure we build in, so that students perhaps don't get to the point of giving up in failure. Sharing some instructional goals, and some of this will be on the next slide too. But I did want to mention one of these for sure: facial feedback. This is a theory that sometimes induces eye rolls in students when I've taught it to my AP Psych classes. But the facial feedback hypothesis notes the connection between our body language and especially our facial expressions and our mood and our affect. And so this is the idea that if you find yourself, smiling, or a classic psychology demonstration was people holding a pencil in their teeth. which, although that's not the most pleasant smile to look at, it is a smile kind of opening your mouth approach that people in, neutralish, if they're in a neutral space, they might find themselves having a slightly more positive affect after that facial feedback. And so, I think of myself anytime that I ask students to imagine their best posture or engage in double checking their posture to make sure they're really sitting up tall or standing with good choral alignment. This change of body position has a way of igniting changes psychologically for them as well, to engage in some change to maybe some behavioral psych, but also certainly a sense of autonomy, choosing to stand certain ways. So, some of this list might be familiar to you, but one thing when you're thinking if you want to increase autonomy, to meet more autonomy needs in your choral class, some things you can think about. First, autonomy is a challenge in musical ensembles. In research that has looked into feelings of autonomy and compared soloists in instrumental music and voice, comparing choral ensembles and instrumental ensembles and team sports and individual sports, musical ensembles and team sports do have lower autonomy feelings overall because part of the goal is being together, acting together, doing things together. But to the extent that we can, and there was a wonderful bit of research, 2022 article by Pendergast is his last name, who looked into refining some of the literature about advice for increasing autonomy and other of the self-determination theory concepts. He found, if you think about your students' backgrounds, their identities, who they are, and select and their interests and strengths and connect the repertoire to that, that even though it's not about the students choosing the repertoire necessarily, this has a way of increasing a connection to that rep and maybe helping students see the choices they have to engage with that repertoire. It opens choice to them and can increase their feelings of autonomy, their feelings of connection to that music. Also, facilitating authentic and reasonable student choice, leading some warm-ups, helping with social routines, maybe engaging in some repertoire selection. I know lots of teachers have great ways of engaging that, of giving some choice to students. And even the musical choices. How much do we need this crescendo to crescendo? What should this articulation sound like as they gain their musical skills and their musical um, perception, being able to give them some choice to decide those things. Teaching students how to identify and then solve musical problems. High autonomy and behavior, plus also some competence as well. But if students can notice that something is a problem and know within themselves or have an idea of how they could go about improving that, then they are more empowered to make choices to solve those musical problems. Promoting a growth mindset, excellent way. Talking with students about their choices and the choices that they have to make, a wonderful way to engage autonomy in the classroom. And that could even be goal setting or evaluation of recordings so that students feel themselves connected to that learning process and to the overall ensemble goals, that they feel like their daily efforts matter. And that helps students feel a sense of connecting their choices to the classroom work. All right. The next overall topic in self-determination theory, competence. In competence, we are looking here. This is perhaps unlike autonomy, which needs a little more explanation. This is more or less what it sounds like, a desire to get better at things and to understand things better and or develop new skills and gain new understandings. But basically, the desire to get good at things, to gain skill. Um, and we'll connect this a little bit to self-efficacy. If you remember the name Albert Bandura of the Bobo doll experiment, that was related to observational learning quite often in behavioral psych. But Bandura also, maybe his more important theory was developing the social cognitive theory of personality and connecting behavior to this. And self-efficacy is the feeling that we can do something, a feeling of being able to or not being able to do something. And just for a quick point of contrast here, competence is usually discussing the actualization of that ability. If you are competent at something, then you are able to do it. And if you're not competent, then you aren't able to do it as well. But in self-efficacy, this is our perception of competence. And on future slides, I'll mention perception or feelings of competence. And we know it's entirely possible to think you're good at something, but actually be low in competence. Or I saw this all the time in students to think that you're not good at something, to have low self-efficacy, but actually to be stronger and to have more competence than you might think. And so it's important when we think about this competence to know that both of these ideas exist and to consider that perception of competence as particularly important in education. Um, this also connects when we start to get to perception of competence to a theory called attribution theory. And I'm going to go a little bit faster on this slide, and I might not talk about all of it. But in attribution theory, we're thinking about causation of behavior and how we attribute the causes of behavior to both to other people, why we think other people do things, and why we think ourselves, whether, our explanations for our own behaviors. And essentially, behavior can be attributed to situational causes, to say that it's an external event, something about the context you're in, or behavior can be seen as dispositional, it's who you are, or some combination of the two. And these are different from intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, or even internal and external locus of control. But this is saying that when I say why I did a thing, I either explain it as because of the situation I was in, or because of who I am as a person. And if you want to read about something that was life-changing for me the first time I learned about it, fundamental attribution error, very important. If I have time at the end, if I know I have time at the end, I might bring it up, but it's just a quick sidelight that I think is important to change your perceptions, or at least it changed my perception of how I thought about other people's behavior. But in terms of attribution and its importance to competence, its connection to competence, when we think about the cause of not just behavior, but the causes of success or failure, people often, research has found some general patterns related to perceptions of competence, self-efficacy. First, there are some internal or dispositional patterns that we see. People either talk about ability versus effort. And ability is seen as an internal thing. It's competence, and it's seen as stable. I mean, you can get a little more competent. It can go up. You might like lose some abilities if you don't practice them, but for that moment, it's fairly stable. Or another dispositional internal factor could be effort. It is a variable quality, which is to say you can, in a single moment, choose to put more effort in or to put less effort in. It changes. But when we also think about success or failure, there are external events or situational attributions. They could be luck, which is seen in some levels at some level as stable. A person is a lucky person, or they were lucky in that situation, and the luck was just a more or less stable quality. Or situationally, it could be task difficulty, which is variable. Some things are harder than others to do. Some repertoire that we select is more challenging. Some warm-ups are easier to manage. Some cutoffs are very friendly. T on beat one. Some cutoffs are much more challenging on the and of beat two. And task difficulty is an external factor that we have. So thinking about that with our perception of competence, students who see themselves as more competent they describe ability and effort as more crucial towards success or determining success or failure. That is to say, if they tried something and it didn't go well, they either see it as an internal factor of I just wasn't good enough at this yet and I need to get better at it, or I needed to put more effort into that task. But students who have a lower level of perceived competence, their self-efficacy skills, they think that they are not capable, and maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but they think they aren't capable, they tend to focus on luck or task difficulty for success or failure. Wow, why did I do so well on a test? Oh, I just got really lucky because the teacher asked the questions that I knew about. Or that, that this was an easy thing, so I did all right on it. and or that was a hard thing, so I didn't do well, or I got was unlucky. And I think it's interesting to think about the students' perceptions of their own competence and how that changes from a situational or a dispositional and internal factor to situational factors, just depending on self-efficacy. Um, One study also looked at when we think about the success or failure of others versus ourselves. And when we're thinking about other people, we tend to see effort. That person just didn't try hard enough. They needed to try harder. Oh, they really gave it everything they got. Even so many life situations, people just say, well, if they'd only tried harder, you can see that as something as a description. But when we think about describing ourselves, often task difficulty comes up a little bit more often, even in light of this perception of competence mentioned up here, that it's just a matter of, why did I succeed or failure? In this case, often we think about this external quality as opposed to a situational quality as opposed to something dispositional like effort. One more stop on our competence highway here, and this is a brief stop in positive psychology and the concept of flow. Certainly, an idea that people have known about for a long time in psychology, but the work has been done in putting together the experience of understanding the experience of flow by a man named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. This is this deep feeling of engagement in a task, what we might have said in the zone, or nowadays being locked in to something, but that moment when you feel some changes about you. And Mihai Csikszentmihalyi put together 9 conditions for flow. You can't make flow happen or force it to happen, but you can generate some situations, you can create some situations to allow flow to happen more easily. Clear goals, so you articulate what somebody's meant to be doing, or you know what you're meant to be doing, and then you know how well you did. Immediate and clear feedback. A skill and challenge ratio and balance for things. So it's not too hard, or neither is it too easy, but it's about 80% skill and 20% challenge. I don't think Csikszentmihalyi created this 80-20 number per se, but I'd have to go back and check his book to be absolutely sure where I pulled that number from. But the 80-20 is recommended by a lot of folks, but you have to be on your own to decide that challenge ratio for yourself. There's a sense of merging of action and awareness. I think the easier way to describe this is the sense of being uh, so engaged in the task that you are thinking about, not really spending a lot of time analyzing what you're doing, but you're simply in the zone, acting and then perceiving your actions. In flow, you have a sense of control. That's an autonomy need. Boom. A loss of self-consciousness. In this case, it's, for example, not worrying so much about what other people think, not being too worried about how people will perceive what you're doing. But in flow, we tend to lose that a little bit and simply act, uh, being in the moment. We're focused and concentrated. You often in flow experience that distorted perception of time. It may be, I know I had many rehearsals that I was either in, and sometimes the ones I led, where time seems to fly by. You get to the end of the rehearsal and kids are like, wait, it's time to go already. And boom, then you know you are really doing something well. Whether they were flowing or not, it's hard to say, but they may have been in a flow state to have that distorted perception. Moments can take forever, and like long stretches of time can go away in the blink of an eye. And then flow is usually an autotelic or an intrinsically motivating experience. And there are great articles out there about flow and the choral classroom. But if we want to think about increasing competence, okay, good. When I say good, I'm looking at my time to remind myself to go faster. Give direct and specific feedback. Are students getting better? If so, how are they getting better? I was the king of good. All right, thank you. Or good, 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 I would say for a while. And after a while, it's like I had to learn what was good. Can I tell them? And if they're not getting better, how can they improve? How can I be very specific? Um, Emphasize thinking about these internal dispositional factors. Emphasize the importance of ability and effort. To me, this ties into the choices of autonomy, choosing to put forth effort into things and thinking about their ability. trying to provide clear goals to the ensemble. So it's more than just blend that vowel, but what are some concrete behaviors in terms of the shape of their mouth, what they're doing with their focusing of their resonance, how they're using their body to sing, what they're listening for, how concrete can those goals be, and then review those goals so they can measure their progress. Um, when you're planning your rep or your rehearsals, thinking about that 80-20 level of challenge, maybe the zone of proximal development from Vygotsky at some level there, but trying to think about the challenge throughout a rehearsal. Scaffolding the development of skills. This also goes into the balance of skill and challenge, but obviously we know don't throw people into the deep end too much. But some challenge is necessary for growth too. So trying to find the right balance there. All right, relatedness. Just want to make sure I get to all the things today. Relatedness, also a topic that I think it defines itself fairly well, but this is our need to feel connected to one another, but to care for others and or feel cared for by others. And certainly, this ties all the way back to evolutionary psychology, where we know it as a survival need. You might perish separately, but be able to survive together in this group as we work together. And it also relates to attachment theory and developmental psychology. If you remember your secure and insecure attachment and bonding with a caregiver, and even Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that third step up on the hierarchy from physiological needs to safety to love and belongingness, our relatedness needs, these are things that motivate us. Um, and oof, I don't know if I'll have time to get all the way into this, but there's an interesting connection between relatedness needs and neuroscience with mirror neurons. Um, and if you've ever watched the video of Rodney Eichenberger and Andre Thomas, what they see is what you get. We've known for a long time in choral music that what your ensemble is seeing from you has an immediate impact on what they are able to produce and what they might create as part of their music. And I think this ties right into mirror neurons. Amazingly, I believe the publication date for that initial video for Eichenberger's video was within, say, 5 years of the first publication of Rizolati's mirror neuron research. They were happening at the same time. I just think that's so cool. Um, originally, Giacomo Rizzolatti was studying mirror neurons, or discovered, theorized about mirror neurons in terms of something called action understanding. And that is to say that part of how we know what other people are doing is that when we watch an action, when I wave to you right now, inside your brain, there are neurons that are activating that are similar to, or maybe identical to, but they are simulating that same action in your brain. And you're able to interpret that as, oh, when I do this, I am waving. So that's how you know I'm waving. Um, Consequently, or following that, there's been subsequent research looking at mirror neurons in animals and in humans and related to a variety of other systems, either planning of actions, deciding how to do a thing, observational learning, watching something and imitating it, our perception of other people's emotions and their experience, and then, of course, empathy as well. And at least as it relates to choral behaviors and the group dynamic of relatedness, there is a certain joint action theory that talks about how we coordinate actions with one another and then evaluate how coordinated we were. And mirror neurons, at least are theorized. There's a lot of research for mirror neurons that they're hypothesized, or there's research that's out there, but as we know, concrete like proof is a challenge to find sometimes. But mirror neurons may play a role in helping us connect actions together to act as one. And this increases something that in social psych we call entitativity, which always sounds like a made up word to me. Just try saying that 3 times fast. Entitativity, entitativity, entitativity. But this is our perception of being a real group. If you're just standing in line with people at the grocery store, this has low entitativity. But if you have a people who are standing in line as part of a marching band, ready to, engage in some drill on the field, high levels of entitativity. Even if it's the same basic line shape, people feel like part of a group. And in some research with joint action, like movement in choirs, there's been associations between movement, either some swaying kinds of movements or movements to show pulse and meter, movements to show rhythm, movements to show phrase somehow and or dynamics, that these things enhance a shared pulse, which makes sense that you help the choir lock into tempo. Some research has found it's helped a sense of balance and blend, but also importantly, singers often report a feeling of being more connected to the rest of the choir, feeling like the choir is more together, a higher sense of entitativity. So a little bit of increased relatedness. I think a lot of people talk about this already with like the social culture and the family culture or the team culture. But I think it starts with you. It starts with us. The more genuine and positive we can be in modeling our relationships with students of a caring adult mentor towards them, this helps them see a positive relationship modeled and helps them work towards similar things. If there are successes, rather than just saying something was successful, every so often pointing to the fact that it's because they cared enough about the other people to put that effort in. That connects competence to relatedness. So I think that's a great thing to call out. Trying to find time for students to work together. Peer mentors or student leaders can be a great way to help students gain competence or gain abilities and skills, but also allows time for students to work together meaningfully to build that sense of connection. Um, and move a little bit in coordinated ways. It can be good to ease some tension. It can be good to help the tone free up, but apparently it can also be good to increase relatedness in that choral classroom. And finally, of course, celebrate together. I hope you celebrate with your ensembles. That's some of the most important things daily and or after big events. But acknowledge challenges, work through those difficulties together, but emphasize that you're working through them together. That's the key part about engaging with relatedness needs. Um, when I looked through the research, what's funny that seemed to be missing from many lists, and so here I have to add my own addendum as the final thought, main topic here, of a way of connecting autonomy and competence and relatedness needs, meeting those needs in the choral classroom, teaching students to read music and through ear training skills, musical fluency. I did not often find this as a suggestion, even in gaining competence. I would think, helping students gain musical skills, let's be really concrete about something that can help them. That finding what think of, like I like to think of as musical fluency, both their listening skills and their literacy skills together. That learning to recognize patterns with the ear and the eye gives students so many more opportunities for autonomous choice that they can look at that music and make decisions about what to do because they understand more about that, which also higher understanding gives higher levels of competence and perhaps even higher levels of self-efficacy. They feel like they can do more. And when you work on those skills together, talk through the challenges, have students talk about what was going on with that music and overcome those challenges as a group. That builds that shared purpose and entitativity, which helps with relatedness needs. Not only are we getting better at stuff, we're getting better at stuff together, which I think is key. And so, if you are unfamiliar with this infographic, I found this this was introduced to me by a podcast, the Choralosophy podcast. I had not heard of Scarborough's reading rope, but Hollis Scarborough, she's a reading researcher, and she created this idea, and even sometimes on stage, she would like weave together a bunch of pipe cleaners to model this, as I understand. But she created essentially a list of 8 kind of strands that students are working on simultaneously as they learn to become a skilled reader. And then Chris Muntz in Choralosophy created some connections to this topic through music. I kept some of his ideas, but then I did modify a few of the terms. But that's not that important what you call these. But just an interesting couple of connections in terms of comprehension, our listening and understanding skills. Background knowledge we might think of as all the tonal patterns, all of the rhythmic patterns that we hold in our head and that students can hear about. This is like building the sounds in their head, and that's their audio library, the things they know, including their musical vocabulary, their ability to hear form or patterns in music. Was this the same or different, or were they similar? Um, Understanding the musical relationships of like intervals or sounds of chords, or kinds of the, even just understanding major and minor kinds of relationships. And of course, that gets into theory concepts. But students have all five of those that are sort of weaving together at the same time that they're thinking about the recognition of literacy patterns. So their knowledge of musical symbols, their ability to decode those symbols and make sense out of them, and then their ability to recognize those symbols more quickly for sight recognition or for pattern recognition of skills. And so, if you want to dig more into this graphic, I find this kind of thing quite fascinating, to think about how this not only develops autonomy, but also certainly builds competence, and I think helps choirs connect together if you work on it together. If you're interested in more, and there's so much more, like there are so many other topics in psych that you can't even get to in 45 minutes. But one book especially, that I must recommend, Art and Science in the Choral Rehearsal by Dr. Sharon J. Paul. I did not know about this book when I was first putting this presentation together, and then a colleague said, "Oh, that sounds interesting, your topic. Have you read this book?" I was like, "No." I looked at research studies. I didn't even, and I wouldn't have found this book very easily because it doesn't have the name psychology in the title. But this book is all about psychology in the choral rehearsal, and it's very relatable in its reading style and its writing style. So go pick up that book. Bridget Sweet has great books, but this Growing Musicians, if you're a middle school teacher, has lots of great connections to middle school psychology and other things. More of a textbooks, these two at the bottom. So if you're really interested in it, you might look at those two textbooks. But that's what I've got today. I really appreciate your time. I hope that something was new, or at least it reminded you of something as we are going through the topics of self-determination theory and autonomy and competence and relatedness and all the other things. So thank you for your time, and thank you, Heather, and for Alfred for inviting me to do this and for hosting so well.